And Carolyn, just to let you know, I did mute everybody. So if you wanted to talk to everybody, you'll have to unmute.
I didn't realize you unmuted me too, Rusty. So very good. I'll start at did everybody hear my introduction or should I start again?
I'm sorry, I figured you'd started talking, but no, we didn't hear anything.
All right. Well, awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. I am Carolyn Ihde, the host tonight, and I'm from the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension and Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. With me tonight is Todd Taylor and Bernie O'Rourke, also from UW-Madison. And our guest speaker today is Rusty Burgett from the National Sheep Improvement Program. And as you can see, one of our polls is up and running. And so thank you very much for taking that, because understanding the demographics of our participants help us to improve extension programs and services. Asking for the following information also helps us meet our instructional requirements for compliance with federal non-discrimination policies. Providing us with this information is voluntary. You are not required to fill out this form to participate in extension programs. But if you have any questions about this form or why Extension collects this information, please contact Kim Weldman, Compliance Coordinator and Equity Strategist, UW-Madison Division of Extension, 608-263-2776, Kim Waldman at wisc.edu. And thank you so much, everyone, for taking that poll. We'll just wait a couple more seconds for people to join in. We still have some people coming into the webinar, and we will finish up the poll here in a little bit. We will be using that chat feature for any questions that you may have. We'll just see how it goes. If we get a lot that are pertinent to what Rusty is covering, I may interrupt him and ask us to answer some questions, or perhaps we'll wait to the end. So please feel free to put any questions in the chat. All right, Bernie, I think you can go ahead and end the demographic poll, please. Thank you. And then we will also ask for you to take our producer poll that lets us know about our participants, where they come from, what they raise, so that we can better match our programming with our producers. I think last time we had about 90% of our participants answering our poll, so that's very good. So thank you so much for answering our polls. All right, thank you. And we can go ahead and close that poll, if you will. So tonight, Rusty Burgett from the National Sheep Improvement Program is with us to be our guest speaker. And Rusty is going to explain all about NSIP and how we can use that in our sheep operations. But the mission of NSIP is to provide predictable, economically important genetic evaluation information to the American sheep industry by converting performance records into relevant decision-making tools. Rusty, thank you for joining us, and I will now hand over the Zoom controls to you so you can introduce yourself and tell us about NSIP, EBVs, and genetic selection.
All right, well, sounds great. Get things shared over here. All right. Can you see my my slides over here pretty well, Carolyn?
I also see your speaker slides.
Oh, see if I can get that fixed. How about now?
Yes, very good.
Okay, all right. Well, yeah, well, thank you very much, Carolyn, and thanks everyone for coming here this evening and chatting a little bit about genetic selection and NSIP. For those of you in Wisconsin, you'll probably recognize a lot of the pictures that I have. I've got a lot of connections to Wisconsin. That's where I went to graduate school. Got my master's degree there from UW-Madison, and spent a little time at the Spooner Agricultural Research Station. So, yeah, fairly familiar with the state, and it's always good to be talking to folks in Wisconsin. So I'm glad you asked me to come visit a little bit this evening, and yeah, let's talk a little bit about genetics. First things first, I did notice there in the slides or in the polls that we have kind of a mixture of sheep and goat producers. And while we are the National Sheep Improvement Program, we do offer genetic evaluation services for goat producers as well. So if you are a goat producer, pretty much anytime I say the word sheep, just hear the word goat, and just about everything is going to be applicable across species. And we'll talk about some of those differences as we go along. But to start off with, I kind of wanted to kind of get to the basics of what we're trying to do with genetic selection. When we're trying to decide which ewes to mate up with which rams, or we're looking to purchase in some new genetics to come into our flocks or to our herds, um, we're looking for a couple different things. And we're not just trying to produce a lamb crop or a kid crop. We're really trying to select for favorable traits that are going to suit our marketing needs, or fill the needs of our flocks and of our herds. So we're not really trying to select for animals. We're really selecting for traits that are going to be passed down in this next generation. And those traits are going to be are going to be determined by combinations of genes within these animals. So really what we're trying to do is we're really trying to select the right genes to be passed down for the next generation to fit our needs or our desires as producers. There's a lot of us in a lot of different states that are on the webinar here tonight. Those needs are going to differ. They're going to change from place to place, operation to operation. What I need here in central Iowa is going to be different than what I saw somebody here from Colorado. What they're going to need in Colorado versus it's going to be different than what you're going to need in northern Wisconsin. But at the end of the day, we're all still trying to select for the same thing, favorable genes to be passed over to the next generation to fit a specific purpose for us. So if we look at a couple of rams, I'm sure a lot of you have done this exercise before and probably know the answer to this is, if I'm trying to select for favorable genes to be passed to the next generation, which of the two rams am I going to pick? And there's a lot of different answers to that question. Heck, I'll be a little bit brave, and I'll even open it up if anybody wants to unmute themselves. Tell me which of these two rams you would pick. Todd Taylor, I saw you're on the call. If you're able to voice up, I got a feeling which animal you would pick. Which one would
I'm
you
pretty
pick?
biased. I remember the ram on the right quite well.
Yeah, yeah. I'm pretty sure Todd is going to pick this ram over here. I'm going to pick that ram as well, for a couple different purposes. But if we want to start off with the very basics, we could go through a set of livestock judging reasons comparing these two animals. Looking at the visual appraisal of these animals, looking at structural soundness, feet and legs, body capacity, breed character, all that great stuff. And everything that I say from here on, I'm not trying to contradict the importance of that visual appraisal. We still need to do that basic exercise of looking at the animals. But what I'm going to talk about from here on is saying that doing the visual appraisal, this is how we've been selecting sheep for about 11,000 years, for about as long as they've been domesticated. But it's not the most powerful tool we have in the toolbox. It's very important to do visual appraisal on these. But if we're trying to select for favorable traits to be passed to the next generation, we need some more information. We need some more tools to really get in to figure out what is the genetic potential of each of these animals. Okay, so we're going to go through a little bit of fairly simple arithmetic here to try to get to that answer, to try to figure out which of those animals has favorable genes. And this is an equation that most of you are probably familiar with. And it's fairly simple, just stating that the phenotype of our animals, so the phenotype is simply the things that we can observe and measure in our flocks. So things like weights, things like birth types and rearing types, the things that we can measure and observe in our flock, that's the phenotype or the performance. That phenotype is determined by the genetics that that animal has, the genetics that that animal inherits from their parents, and the environment that they were raised in. Okay. When we're selecting breeding stock, this environmental part, you'll see here in a slide or two, that this environmental part clouds our vision up quite a bit. But really, it's only this genotype that gets passed on to the next generation. So that's what we need to try to quantify. And that's what we're trying to do with these estimated breeding values through NSIP. Okay, so we've got our winning ram here. I just happened to think that almost everybody was going to pick that ram on the right, and I don't disagree with you. This is a top-notch ram. We'll talk more about why I think that here in just a little bit. But in this ram, when I'm trying to figure out how much of what we see here or how much of what we can measure gets passed down to the next generation, we need to look at the concept of heritability. Most of you are probably familiar with that concept of heritability, but heritability is simply how much or what percentage, what proportion of those traits, of those phenotypes get passed down to the next generation. How much of the difference in phenotype is a product of the genetics relative to the environmental differences. We'll expand on that a little bit, but on average, looking at all of our traits, on average, about 80% of what we see in an animal, what we observe and what we measure, is actually due to the environment that that animal was raised in. Okay. But that 20% that we can't see, that 20% that is controlled by genetics, that's the part that gets passed down to the next generation. That's the part that we need to try to quantify, we need to try to get to, so we can make educated decisions which animals are going to be the best to fit our individual needs. Okay? Because we know at the very basic level, each of these animals, every single living thing, it's a product of this blueprint of DNA. Okay, so we have all this genetic material in DNA. And the way that these strands of DNA actually come together and get read, that physical blueprint of what that animal is supposed to do in terms of genetic potential, that's what we call the true breeding value of an animal. Okay, that's literally how these DNA come together and how they code for that animal to actually perform. Okay. Now we'll see here in a few minutes that what that DNA says and what we actually get sometimes are different things, but how that DNA actually comes together, that's the true breeding value of the animal. That's the traits. Let's use weaning weight as a trait example here. So the animal's genetic potential for weaning weight is going to be controlled by how these individual base pairs come together in DNA, how they're structured together, how they're packaged together in genes. And most of our production traits, they're going to be combinations of hundreds, if not thousands of genes. Okay. So a trait like weaning weight, it's going to have this little portion here, this gene right here, that's going to control maybe 0.1% of the animal's weaning weight. Another gene over here control maybe 3% of weaning weight. Another gene over here can control 20% of weaning weight. In the actual weaning weight, genetic potential itself is the cumulative effect of hundreds and thousands of genes all coming together. What we're trying to do is we're trying to simplify all of that cool basic science through these things called estimated breeding values, trying to get to this thing called the true breeding value. Okay, that'll make sense here in a little bit as we actually walk through the mathematics in an example. Okay, and we get to this true breeding value through that simple equation that we talked about just a couple slides ago. Okay, because we can measure the phenotype of our animal, we can observe the performance for certain traits, so we can see how they perform for weaning weight and see what their birth type was and their rearing type was. And that phenotypic information is going to start to chip away at what the genotype is or what that breeding value is of that animal. So let's start to look at some of the actual data on this ram here. So let's just say for our example purposes, this ram here, he was a triplet born, he was triplet raised, he was about 9 pounds at birth, about 64 pounds at weaning, and Another 2 months after that, in a post-weaning time period, he was about 140 pounds. Okay, so we're utilizing some phenotypic information, some production data to start to chip away at what that true breeding value is. Now, the rub of it is how accurately we're predicting that breeding value with the various information that we have. Okay, so a lot of folks, as I'm talking to them about NSIP and using estimated breeding values, I'll tell them, theoretically, you've been using estimated breeding values for years, whether you've known it or not. Anytime we use any sort of phenotypic information to make our selection decision, we are trying to estimate to some extent the true breeding value of that animal. Okay, so we are using some form of estimated breeding value when we're utilizing phenotypic information. Okay. But like I said before, with the heritabilities, though, how much of these phenotypes are going to be passed down to the next generation? On average, 80% of this information is actually controlled by the environment. Only about 20% of these phenotypes is actually controlled by the genetics of that animal. Okay, so that's what we're going to try to build upon and try to really nail down on that the genetic portion of it. Okay, so we're going to build upon that equation that I showed in just a couple of slides. And I promise this is about as complex as the mathematics are going to get throughout the entire night. Nothing more than some basic algebra. Okay, I'm not going to ask you to bounce any equations here tonight, but we're going to use that fairly simple equation to actually predict those genotypes. And the way that I expanded this equation just a little bit is we're going to try to predict the genetic value of that animal. So we're going to use the information that we have, those phenotypes, which is represented in the P right here. So we're going to utilize that phenotype to try to estimate the genotype. And we do that by first looking at how the phenotype compares to the mean performance of the population. Okay, so if we're using weaning weight as our example, how did our individual's weaning weight compare to the mean weaning weight of the population? Okay, and then we know that that phenotype was a product of the genotype and the environment that those animals were all raised in. All right, so now we can start to chip away at this equation a little bit, and we can really start to figure out this genetic value that we're trying to figure out. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to try to minimize environmental differences. So in NSIP, when we're looking at calculating estimated breeding values, we raise groups of animals in these things called contemporary groups. And a contemporary group is nothing more than a group of sheep that's raised in about the same manner at about the same time. Okay, so my flock, we're right in the middle of lambing time right now. I put rams in for 34 days, 2 breeding cycles of for those ewes. Okay, so all of those lambs that are going to be born within a 34, 35-day age period, they're born at about the same time. I'm managing those lambs in the same environment, managing them all in about the same way. By managing them all in the same environment, I can almost eliminate that environmental part out of our equation. And now I just have to look at these 3 variables right here. Now I can use the things that I can measure relative to the mean of the population to get me a good indicator of the genetic value of those animals. Okay, so we'll go through a real quick example of that. Okay, so weaning weight is the pretty typical example. It's one that we all pretty much will know on most of our animals. And yeah, I think one that most folks can relate to. So if I want to estimate an individual animal's breeding value, I'm going to start by collecting those phenotypes, which are these weights right here. So I've got weaning weights on 1 through about 500 head. Doesn't really matter how many animals we're looking at, but I'm looking at the individual weaning weights of these animals. And I have the average performance of that group. Okay. And we talked about the first step of generating an estimated breeding value is seeing how do each of these individual animals perform relative to the mean of the group. Okay, that's this portion right here of our equation. So we add that in. We simply take our individual phenotype and subtract the average or the mean from it. Okay, so for this first ram wham right up here, we see that he has a +3, meaning he was 3 pounds heavier at weaning time than the mean of that group. This number 2 here, he was 59 pounds. He was 2 pounds lighter than the mean of that group. But we can go through the entire list right there. All right. So now when we start to chip away and start to get to that genetic portion of that equation, over years and years of research, people that are far smarter than I am, they did the math and they figured out the heritabilities of the majority of our traits. Okay. And we talked about that before. The heritability is simply the proportion in this difference in phenotype relative to the mean. The proportion of that can be explained by genetics is the heritability. So if I multiply this difference in performance by the heritability, I can get a base estimated breeding value for weaning weight for each of these animals. Okay. So if I take a 0.3 multiplied by the heritability of weaning weight, which for purposes here, I chose about 0.25. Multiplying 3.25, we get an estimated breeding value of 0.75 is the estimated breeding value for ram number 1. Okay. Ram number 2 has a negative breeding value, estimated breeding value of a negative 0.5. Okay. Everybody with me so far? Fairly simple mathematics. Okay. If I want to make it one step more complicated, if we put that environmental part back into this equation right here, since we have a little bit of an estimate of the genetic portion, we can also see how much of the difference in performance was environmental. Okay, so then I simply just took the phenotypic variance here, and I took away the estimated breeding value portion of it, the genetic portion of it, and I can figure out that there are differences, environmental differences in how we raise those animals as well. These environmental differences, these are the ones that really cloud our vision. Okay, so if we look at an animal like number 71 here, okay, 71 compared to animal number 3 and animal number 4, a 71-pound weaning weight versus a 49-pound weaning weight, we can see that a portion of that is genetic differences, but a bigger portion of that difference is actually environmental differences. When we're looking at just the raw weaning weights alone, that environmental part clouds our vision an awful lot. Okay, so we want to get to this part right here. We want to get to how much of that difference in performance is due to genetics alone. And the example we just did here, I said this is actually a true way of calculating an estimated breeding value. So you can look up what the heritabilities of various traits are, and you can get a basic traditional estimated breeding value. Yeah, just by using Microsoft Excel or scratching it out on a notebook. Not that complicated of arithmetic. Most folks can calculate this. Okay. The challenge that we have, though, is how accurate is that estimated breeding value that we just looked at? Because really, if you think about it, we're comparing one data point relative to the average of that group. So we're looking at really at just one single data point relative to however many we have in that group. So it's not really a ton of information that's going into that EBV calculation. And I can bore you with it. I'll actually show you the math here in a couple of slides. But if we want to look at actually how we calculate the accuracy value of a EBV when we're looking at just one data point relative to a group, an individual's own performance, we take the square root of the heritability, and that's our accuracy. So in this simplified method here, these estimated breeding values are only about 50% accurate. Okay, we're only explaining about 50% of the variation in the genetic differences there through that method. Okay, so that's where NSIP kind of comes along. That's where the methods that we use add a little bit more statistical power to these tools. And the best part is we do all the arithmetic for you, so you don't have to worry about all of that. Okay, so we can calculate estimated breeding values based on an animal's performance and those that they're born with, their contemporaries. The problem is with one single data point, the accuracy of that evaluation can be relatively low. So to combat that, we're going to add more data into our equations, and we will we'll build more statistical power. We can make more educated decisions. Okay, and I'm not trying to insult anyone's intelligence here with this caveat here. The math that goes into these estimated breeding values, it's not proprietary or secret information. I'll actually show you here on the next slide, but don't get overwhelmed. Okay, it's actually not it's not black magic voodoo or anything like that. It is, for someone who has a background in statistics, it's fairly straightforward mathematics to calculate estimated breeding values if you can do a little bit of calculus. And then this information down here is how we calculate the accuracies. The 99.9% of sheep producers in the United States don't need to worry about how all this math is actually done. But this is the science that goes behind it. And it's that it's not proprietary. It's not secretive by any means. It's just a little bit complex. So that's where the value of NSIP comes in. But you don't need to understand all that mathematics to understand how these methods that we utilize can build accuracy and make a more powerful selection tool. Because we just talked about, if we use this ram right here, his individual performance for weaning weight, that estimated breeding value was about 50% accurate. Okay. Now, using a little bit of logic, we know that this ram right here, he got his genes for weaning weight from somewhere. He got half of them from his sire and half of them from his dam. Okay, so what we do in NSIP is we take the weaning weight of the sire, the weaning weight of the dam, and utilize it in his breeding value calculations. Okay. Now we know that this ram was not born in a vacuum. He has litter mates and he has half sibs from other dams and lots of other relatives within his contemporary group. So what we do is we take the weaning weight performance of these guys, use it in his estimated breeding value calculations. We use grandparents, we use great-grandparents, we use third cousins twice removed in our ranch that's 6 states away. All of these known relatives of this animal right here, all of that data goes into his estimated breeding value calculations. So we're not using just one single data point anymore. We're using hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of data points in calculating these estimated breeding values for each individual. By adding more information, we're accounting for more potential sources of variation. We can increase the accuracy of our evaluation. Okay, so we can take out more of that environmental part that's clouding our vision, and we can really hone in on what the genetic potential of those animals are for all these various traits. Now I'm going to take it just one final step further, more complicated, and then we'll simplify again. Okay, after we've taken the performance of this animal's weaning weight, we're also going to take in a few other factors into consideration. One of those factors being these things called genetic correlations. Okay. Now we know that several of our traits are correlated with one another. For example, with weaning weight, we know that the individual's weight at birth, his birth weight, is actually going to have an impact on his genetic potential for weaning weight. So what we do in the NSIP evaluation is we take that correlated trait of birth weight into consideration when we're calculating that estimated breeding value. Okay. We also take in other traits like his weaning weight and his post-weaning weight are going to be highly correlated. So we're going to use the information from his post-weaning weight in his weaning weight estimated breeding value and vice versa. Okay, so we use these genetic correlations, and that those genetic correlations are simply when if two traits are correlated, that means the performance at one trait will tell us a bit of information about another trait. Okay, so if we have positively correlated traits, as we increase trait A, we also tend to increase trait B. A good example of that, I saw we had some fiber producers on the call here, is generally as we increase grease fleece weight, we also increase fiber diameter. Okay, that's not a good thing, but those are positively correlated traits. They both move in the same direction. Okay. We can also have negatively correlated traits where we increase one trait and we decrease another trait. We also have other traits that are simply no correlations or very little correlations. All that information gets added into our breeding value calculations. And at the end of the day, you don't have to worry about any of those calculations. By simply submitting a few phenotypes to the NSIP system, we return back to all the producers this right here, which is just a panel of estimated breeding values for all the various traits. Okay. So what does an estimated breeding value actually tell us? So if you look at across the top here, we have all these various traits and all these abbreviations. They're broken down by an age category and a measurement type. So W stands for weaning, WT stands for weight. We'll continue with our weaning weight example. Then we have our estimated breeding value of a 3.0 here. Okay. So what this tells us at the end of the day, what this tells us is that this individual animal, they have the genetic potential to be 3 kilograms heavier than the base average of that breed at weaning time. Okay, so after all that information was collected, it got put into those algorithms. We were able to figure out the genetic potential with a 94% accuracy that he has the genetic potential to be 3 kilograms heavier at weaning time than the base average of that breed. Okay, so that's a weaning weight example. We can also look at other traits like PWWT here. That's post-weaning weight. This frame right here at a 4.5. That means he has the genetic potential to be 4.5 kilograms heavier at the post-weaning time period than the base average of that breed. Looking at a few other traits. This one right here is eye muscle depth, yearling eye muscle depth. Okay, so this says this guy here, he has the genetic potential to have 1.6 millimeters deeper loin eye than the base average of that breed. Also expect him to shear or to have the genetics to shear a slightly coarser fleece by 1/10 of a micron, but to shear about a 23% heavier fleece based on those genetics alone. Okay, so we can look at all these various traits, and these breeding values simply calculate the genetic potential of that animal for that trait. Okay, so that's the basics of what we do at NSIP. So before I move on, I want to pause right there. Is everyone comfortable with kind of the basic points of NSIP and the basics of what we're trying to do with estimated breeding values? Any questions so far? Feel free to stick them in the chat, or Carolyn, I might need some help reading the chat if we have
Yep,
questions.
that's fine. Yep, and then there's also a raise your hand feature, so if or reactions, you can communicate with us that way too. So please feel free to use the chat or raise your hand.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I had a couple questions. I saw some comments about how does environment play into all of this? How do we account for environment in these estimated breeding values? Okay, I saw just briefly, I didn't get to read the details of it, but I think Todd had mentioned something about this genetic potential. This is truly the animal's genetic potential for this particular trait, regardless of what environment it is in. Okay, so that it is its genetic potential. It is up to us as producers to allow those animals to express that genetic potential. Okay, so we can see some differences in phenotypes and the actual performance of these animals if we're not providing the adequate environment or the adequate opportunity for those animals to express that genetic potential. Okay, now the environment itself, in theory, should have no impact on these estimated breeding values. And the way that we do that is through these things called genetic connections or genetic linkages. Okay, so the way that we utilize those genetic linkages, and that I'll give you an actual example, is that I've got polypays here at our farm, and I have some genetic connections to Todd's flock up in Arlington. Okay, so what we're doing there with those genetic connections is we've tested similar genetic lines in Todd's environment in South Central Wisconsin. We've also tested those genetics in my environment here in Central Iowa. I also have genetic connections to a flock in Colorado. So we've also tested genetics here at my place and in Colorado and vice versa. So by doing that, by having genetic connections to flocks of various production types and various environments, we're able to see, okay, this line performed well in this environment. Did it perform just as well in this environment over here? Okay. So by testing multiple genetic lines in multiple environments, we can really prove that, yes, these genetics do hold up across those environments, and we can take that environmental part out of the equation. This is simply the genetic potential of those animals, regardless of the environment that you put them in. Okay, it is also it's up to us as producers to make sure we're matching up the right genetics with the right environments. Okay, so the genotypes or the estimated breeding values that do well for me here in central Iowa with my feed resources and my management system, those genetics might not perform as well in, say, the high elevation sagebrush steppe out in the Rocky Mountains. Okay, a ewe that's going to give me 2.4 lambs per, or a ram that's going to sire daughters that'll give me 2.4 lambs per ewe here in Iowa. That's probably not the same ram that we want to use in that lower input type environment in an extensively managed operation. Not that one is better than the other, just we have different resources available. We should be looking at different genetic potentials that we can match up with those resources that we have available to us. Okay. All right.
Rusty, were you able to go through all the questions that you wanted to answer?
I'll get a kind of a brief scan here, and that I see, grain feeding versus grass feeding. Like I said, we're going to account for that all through those genetic linkages. I know personally with my own personal flock, I'm connected to some flocks that are 100% grass based. Connected to a flock that's grass-based and does not deworm any of their animals. And I'm also connected to some flocks that are 100% confinement, and those animals are, they never see a fresh blade of grass in their lives. So again, by testing these same genetics in all of these different environments, we can get to this true genetic potential of those animals, okay? Not just those phenotypes, the true genetic potential, regardless of the environment that those animals are coming from. So, all right. So just real quickly again here, I see another known heritabilities for things like parasite resistance, hoof condition, mothering. Probably don't have time to go through all of those tonight. You can look those up. I know the Sheep Production Handbook has got a table of the majority of our common traits, and the heritability is listed there. I'll say a lot of those traits that you listed are fairly lowly heritable traits. So while we're talking about the concept of heritability is for traits that have lower heritabilities, okay, so they're more impacted by environment. Parasite resistance is a good example of that. The heritability for parasite resistance is on the lower end. I believe it's like a 0.15, 0.18, something like that. So that means that about 15% of the variation that we see in that trait is going to be due to the genetics. The majority is going to be due to the environment. Okay, that's not saying that the genetic portion is not important. Okay, it's just as important as that environmental part of it is, because it's without the genetic potential, it doesn't matter how well we manage those animals, they'll never outperform that genetic potential. One of my old mentors used to tell me is that you can't feed your way out of poor genetics, but you can starve yourselves out of good ones. Okay, so we need to have that genetic base there and the environment for those animals to succeed. Okay.
Okay, and then I think we have a question on the slide that you're on right now. So it says on the interpreting EBV slide, what are the percent values below the EBVs?
Yeah, great question. So these percentages in italics, that's the accuracy value of those estimated breeding values. Okay. And we can get into the details if you want later, but the accuracy values, they're largely dependent upon the heritability of the trait and the quantity and the quality of the data. The more data we have going into a breeding value calculation, the higher the accuracy is going to be. So since we're just talking about heritabilities, a trait like number of lambs born, maternal weaning weight or maternal ability, those are lowly heritable traits, and you can see it takes more data to build accuracy in those traits. Our fleece traits, very highly heritable traits, okay? We need less data to generate high accuracy estimated breeding values, okay? So yeah, great question. So the accuracies are getting, we can talk more about accuracies later, but every time we calculate an estimated breeding value, we also give you an accuracy value of that calculation so you can know how much data is actually going into that. And basically, it's the higher this accuracy value, the more reliable it is. The less likely this breeding value will change, and the more likely that offspring out of this ram are going to perform about like this. So the higher the number there, the more data we have, the better it is. Okay. Any other big pertinent questions I need to hit right now, Carolyn, or I can come back to this list too towards the
Yeah,
end.
Yep, I think we're good for now.
All right. All right.
Yeah. I'll try to keep track of some of them.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to build on kind of where we're going. So I'll take a real quick step back. So we have a fairly long list of traits that are available. So we have traits for like number of lambs born, number of lambs weaned for our reproductive traits. We have the maternal trait of maternal weaning weight. This is the dam's contribution to weaning weight. We also have traits for body weight at various time periods. So birth weight, weaning weight, post-weaning weight, yearling weight. We also have the carcass measurements or carcass composition as determined by ultrasound. So we have fat deposition and eye muscle depth here for our carcass traits. We also have several fleece traits here. Just for an example, there's 3 of them for fiber diameter, grease fleece weight, and staple length. Okay, so for a lot of our majority of our breeds, we have a long list of breeding values that are available. We also have parasite resistance estimated breeding values. So we can do the fleece traits. Yeah, for all of our breeds, we also have these things called production indexes. So what a production index does is it combines multiple traits into one number. So this ram that we have listed up here, this is a Targhee ram. So Targhees, they're in our range breed evaluation. So we have an index called the USA Range Index. And what the range index does is it balances the reproductive performance, so number of lambs born. It combines the growth of those animals, okay? And it also combines fleece weight and fiber diameter all into one number. So what it's trying to do is it's trying to increase the prolificacy of the ewe flock. It's trying to increase the early growth rates of those animals, trying to increase fleece weight while maintaining fiber diameter and maintaining yearling weight all at the same time. So using one number, this 113.4, that's going to combine all of these numbers into one. And that for this particular one, it's the higher that number, the more prolific animals we will be selecting, higher fleece weights, while trying to maintain fiber diameter and maintain our yearling weights. Okay, we have various production indexes. Polypace, for example, our main production index is going to be the USA Maternal Index, and that combines number of lambs born, number of lambs weaned, weaning weight, and the maternal weaning weight of those animals. So it's trying to maximize pounds of lamb weaned per ewe that's lambing. Okay. Quick question I saw that popped in there is there a production index for the hair sheep? And yes, we do have it's the USA Maternal Hair Index. And that index is very similar to the US Maternal Index, where it's again designed to try to maximize pounds of lamb weaned by moving number born, number weaned, and the mothering ability and the weaning weight potential of those lambs themselves. So trying to move all 4 of those traits all at the exact same time. We have a Carcass Plus Index that tries to maximize lean meat yield. So it's trying to minimize fat deposition, maximize muscle, and also maximizing the post-weaning growth of those animals. Okay. Then we have a big long list of other indexes that are available. So we also have self-replacing carcass indexes. So that's a fun one because it combines carcass information with reproductive information. Yeah, so a lot of different indexes. There's a chance that if it's a trait that's of interest to you, chances are we've got an estimated breeding value for that. Okay. So that's what we currently have with our all of the breeds we have in the United States. All breeds are welcome to participate in NSIP. We can generate those estimated breeding values, yeah, based on the production data that you collect on your farm and on your ranch, and generate all those estimated breeding values we just talked about. the next couple slides, I want to talk about kind of where we're going here in the future. Okay. So we'll go back to our prize-winning ram right here. And I said, I don't blame anybody for choosing this ram. A lot of the original ewes that I bought to start my personal flock with go back to this ram. So I'm pretty familiar with him. I really like what he's done. Okay. I showed you his phenotypic data earlier on. Okay, but looking at what his current estimated breeding values are. Okay. I chose this ram because he produces daughters that might not drop as many lambs as the rest of the polypays out there, but the lambs that they do drop, those ewes tend to wean. Okay. And he also kind of combined all of these traits into a pretty good USA maternal index there. But if you look at it, this ram has very high accuracy estimated breeding values because this ram, he was used very heavily. He has over 400 progeny recorded in 4 different flocks. And all of that data being raised in multiple environments, it's led to very high accuracy values. His progeny perform just like his breeding values say they should perform. Okay. But what about a ram lamb like this? Okay. This is a ram lamb I picked up a couple years ago. And yeah, well, he had 0 progeny. And you can see much lower accuracy values compared to that ram. Okay. But we
Hey,
don't always
Rusty,
yeah,
you want to back up one slide? There's a question about
sure.
the Rams EBVs. Go ahead. See if you can unmute Gene.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Yeah,
Okay,
Gene, go ahead.
on the first 2 EBVs,
Yep.
number of lamb borns, and then NLW. I don't know what the W stands for, but anyhow, those are now presented in percentages when the number of lamb borns used to be a number, wasn't it?
As long as I've been involved with NSIP, it's been reported as a percentage.
So what we've done there, Gene, is yes, it does come back on our reports as a percent or as a number. So like the NLB for this ram would be a 0.048. Basically, what Rusty's done for this is he's multiplied that by 10 because basically that's what that 0.48 means. Is it's 0.48 or it's 4.8% per 100 ewes.
Gotcha. Okay. I
Yeah.
just
So
said
that's all he's done is he's moved the decimal point and put a percent behind it.
okay. That's the first time I'd have seen it. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. So the way that kind of think about these, and you raised another question for me, Gene. So I appreciate you speaking up. Yeah, the units on the number born and number weaned, those are on a percentage basis. So this is theoretically saying if he sires 100 daughters, out of those $100 daughters, you should expect to get 4.8% more lambs at lambing time than the base average of that breed. Okay. Now, some folks might be questioning if they're only dropping 4.8% more lambs, how can they wean 21% more lambs? And that's very common question. It's a little bit hard to kind of wrap the head around it. But those 2 numbers are calculated independent of one another. So this is number of lambs weaned is looking at total number of lambs weaned by his daughters relative to all of the polypay lambs weaned in that given production year. Yeah, regardless of how many are born. So it's looking at the total number that are born, calculating those breeding values, and then calculating total number of weaned, independent of number born. So, as I said, with number of lambs weaned higher than NLB, this is just saying his daughters, they raise their lambs. They don't lose very many lambs. They might not drop as many as others, but they definitely raise what they drop. And yeah, having a lot of daughters and granddaughters out of this ram, I can attest to that. Is yeah, my lambing percentage might not be as high as some people, but very little death loss. Those daughters definitely raise their lambs. All right. So I'll go ahead and yeah, we'll keep moving forward and say if you have questions, feel free to shout them out. But I got just a couple more slides, and then we can do some more take some more questions. Okay. So we talked about, so that ram we just looked at, he had a ton of progeny, great numbers. This guy here, young ram, fairly newer flock to NSIP, so less data going into these breeding value calculations. It was a little bit more of a risk for me to buy this ram lamb because of these lower accuracy values. Okay, I'm not as confident that his lambs are going to perform like this. Okay. Now, I'm still, compared to having no data or just raw phenotypic data alone, these breeding values are very accurate. They're telling me a lot more information. But this ram compared to the last one, these values might change just a little bit. And that's where some of our new technologies might be able to help in utilizing genomic technologies or looking at the DNA makeup of these animals. Using that information can shed some more light and make these breeding values more accurate at a younger age. And if we can do that at a younger age, we can make selection decisions at a younger age, hopefully be a little bit more efficient in our management systems. We can also expedite our genetic progress by decreasing our generation interval. If we can select for younger animals and utilize those animals in our breeding decisions, we can shorten our generation interval and expedite the amount of change. And we can do that by using these genomic evaluations. So looking at the actual DNA makeup or blueprint of how these animals are put together, using that DNA information in our estimated breeding value calculations. So to do that, right now what we're doing is we utilize this thing called a 50K SNP chip array. So this is just a fancy genetic test that looks at 50,000 different locations across the genome of this animal. And at those 50,000 locations, each one of those adds a little bit more information into our selection decisions. And it does that in a couple different ways. One, the first benefit of this DNA evaluation is we can get a parentage evaluation based on DNA. Okay, kind of like what you see on CSI. We can look at we can match up the right animals with the right parents and get accurate pedigrees. And when we're looking at genetic evaluations, knowing true, accurate pedigrees is kind of the first most important step. Some examples, the dairy industry, when they first went to doing DNA parentage, and I remember the dairy industry is about 90% artificial insemination. They had about an 18 to 20% error rate in their pedigrees when they first went to genomic evaluations. So someone wrote down the wrong straw of semen going into the wrong cow. And yeah, we see it on the sheep side of things where I'm sure nobody else has ever had breeding groups that get mixed together at breeding time, or you get ram lambs that sneak out and get in with a breeding group. Or what I've had this lambing season is you've got 8 ewes that lambed, you've got a pile of 20 lambs in between them, and you're trying to get the right lambs matched up with the right ewes. Okay, getting accurate pedigrees can do wonders to the accuracy of our estimated breeding value calculations. And we can also figure out exactly how related animals are within our genetic evaluation. We also can get results for the known genetic conditions or the single gene tests, things like scrapie susceptibility, the TMM154 susceptibility, myostatin, callipege, borrelia, those traits that are controlled by 1 or 2 or 3 genes. All of those are built into that 50K SNP chip test. So with one genetic test, we can get all of these benefits in one. Okay. So the parentage evaluation and genetic conditions, that takes up about 1,200 of those 50,000 SNPs. The rest of those go into these genetic evaluations, and they help us out, particularly with these like difficult or expensive to measure traits. We can utilize those genomics to get at traits that are harder for us to record, things like disease resistance, feed efficiency, longevity, or stayability of the ewes. Those traits that are only expressed in one sex, like litter size. You know, we calculate number born, number weaned for this ram here, but he's never actually going to give birth to a set of lambs. So it's a sex limited trait. Genomics can help us out with these traits and shed more light on the genetic potential of those animals, hopefully at an earlier age. Okay. But as powerful as genomics are going to be, it does not replace the need for data collection. We still need to be collecting on-farm, on-ranch data. A lot of folks think in the future, all we need to do is collect a DNA sample, and that's all we'll actually need to do. On the contrary, we're going to need to still be collecting data. The genomics are just going to compound the value of that data. Okay. So right now, we have our hair sheep evaluation has transitioned to a full-blown genomic evaluation. So we have genome-enhanced estimated breeding values, primarily for our Katahdins. They're our main hair breed. in NSIP. We have a research trial going on right now, though. Dr. Ron Lewis from University of Nebraska-Lincoln, he has a trial going on called the Sheep GEMS trial that's going to expand that to our 3 other breed types. So our terminal breeds, our range breeds, and our maternal wool breeds like polypays. So yeah, we're year 3 of a 4-year trial there. So here in the next couple of years, we'll have genomic evaluations for all of our breeds. So my last couple slides here, I just wanted to show you real quickly that utilizing these tools truly does work in trying to move the needle on genetic progress. So on all of these, the next few slides, I'm going to show you the genetic progress that's been made in a couple of our breeds over a 10-year time period. So starting back at 2015, coming out to the current year of 2024, looking in polypays, over that time, the polypays went from an average number born of 6.2 up to a 16.9. So added increased number of lambs born by about 10% over a 10-year time period just through genetic selection alone. Okay, even greater gains in our number of lambs weaned. So we're selecting for better sheep that raise the lambs that they drop. Okay. Also looking at the maternal ability. So this is maternal weaning weight, or the dam's contribution to weaning weight. Okay, so right now getting about an extra 1.9, almost 2 pounds at weaning time because those lambs are being raised by better mothers compared to 10 years ago. So just through genetic selection alone, adding in the maternal ability of those animals, looking at the actual growth rates of those animals of weaning weight and post-weaning weight, seeing similar genetic gains through utilizing these tools. And that can be reflected in this USA Maternal Index, combining all of those traits into one, seeing the same magnitude of change over a 10-year time period. Looking at targees, increasing greased fleece weight while maintaining fiber diameter. And as I mentioned earlier, this is kind of hard to do because these are generally highly correlated traits. Generally, as you increase fleece weight, you also increase fiber diameter. But by utilizing the breeding values, you can better select those outlier animals that can shear a heavier fleece while maintaining the fiber diameter that they had. So, Gene, I see you with your hands up. I'm running short on time. I'll come right back to you. I'm going to just get through the last couple slides, and I'll come back to you. Okay. So just moving on to one of our terminal sire breeds, our Suffolks, for example, increasing weaning weights and post-weaning weights while maintaining their eye muscle deposition and decreasing fat deposition, so increasing cutability of those animals. And it's kind of been interesting. We've seen a negative correlation between these 2 traits. And I look to purebred show sheep and weather type sheep as a good example of this. Generally your purebred show sheep, they're a little bit of a larger frame, later maturing animal, a little bit of a faster growing type animal, but tend to be a little bit lighter muscled, versus your weather type sheep that are a little bit slower growing, but heavier muscled. Those are generally antagonistic traits. By utilizing breeding values, again, you can find those outliers that can do both. They can move the needle in the same direction. Katahdins, so looking at the hair sheep, looking at number born, number weaned, similar increases to what we saw in the polypays, while also increasing potential for weaning weights and post-weaning weights, and combining in their USA Maternal Index. So yeah, just to wrap things up here, just remember in breeding, we're simply trying to figure out which traits are going to be passed down to the next generation, and utilizing these estimated breeding values, it really combines the most information. It's the most powerful statistical tool we have to really move the genetic progress needle in a short amount of time. And those graphs I just showed, they demonstrate that. In practice, these things really are doing what they're saying that they're going to do. So if you want some more information about NSIP, I'll stick around and answer more questions, but you can always check out our website, nsip.org. If you're a seed stock or purebred breeder and you're interested in generating these estimated breeding values on your animals, I highly encourage you to jump on our website. You can see information about joining there. If you're a commercial producer, you're welcome to join NSIP. Everybody's welcome to join NSIP, but if you're a commercial producer, really the most value would not be for you joining and collecting all this data yourself, but utilizing these EBVs when you're sourcing genetics. So you're going out to buy rams, utilizing this and buying rams with the numbers that are going to be matched up with your environment. That's how you can really see the most bang for your buck on the commercial side of things. If you're interested in finding some rams with estimated breeding values on them, we have all of the sheep, all of their genetic data is publicly available. We have what's called the NSIP searchable database. You can link to it from our website here, but you can go to that site and you can type in specific parameters. So say you want to look for a ram that's going to increase your milking ability of your ewes, your maternal weaning weight. So you can go into the website, you can type in what maternal weaning weights you're looking for, hit the button, it'll spit out a list of animals that have those specific breeding values that you're looking to make improvements on. So first question I see just right on the bottom of the list there is how much does it cost to have your flock analyzed? So it's there's 2 fees to be a part of NSIP. There's a membership fee. That's every annually you'll pay a membership fee, which is based on flock size. And it's starts at $100 and it goes at a maximum you'll pay $500. It's capped at $500. Let's see, there's also a database fee. So it costs $3.50 per animal that you generate estimated breeding values on. So for most flocks, it's going to cost $250 to $300 a year to generate that data. If that data helps you sell 1 extra ram a year, you paid for your cost in membership to NSIP. So in the essence,
I just dropped a link to the enrollment form under that question.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. So I'm going to stick around and I will answer questions, but I want to turn it back over to Carolyn if she's got some things to do you have some things you need to wrap up with or a poll or anything before I don't want to keep people way too late.
Okay, great. There I am. So the survey will actually pop up when they end the webinar, so we can keep going with a few questions. So Todd put the link, like he said, here's a QR code and the link for NSIP. And before we get back to questions for Rusty, I just want to announce next month's webinar with Dr. Andrew Weaver. He's going to talk about feeding your flock's genetic potential with proper nutrition management. So he's going to talk about grazing. And there's just a few more slides for us. And yeah, Rusty, if you want to stick around and answer some of those questions or have a conversation, that's great with me, but maybe you have to get back to the lambing barn. I'm not sure. And I think maybe you answered the last question about how can we use NSIPs in a crossbred system. And I think you answered that great. Like if we could go to NSIP and look for those traits that we are wanting to bring into our program would be great. And I think there's some questions about feeding and how we meet that genetic potential, I think. So I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. And also for anybody who's in the Wisconsin, Iowa area, I will be up at Arlington. Was that next weekend?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just make sure to come into the Arlington Sheep Day, and like the Wisconsin Sheep Breeders Co-op is also having their meeting there. So yeah, make sure to stop in there, and yeah, I'm happy to chat with anybody in person if you can make it to that event. But yeah, I'll get through some of these questions here. I think we talked about the cost. I said Todd put the enrollment form. You can plug in your numbers into that enrollment form, and it'll spit out what your exact cost would be. For your particular flock. Question here is, excuse me, how many years of data are optimum to have information on before starting analysis? That's a great question there, Christine. I'm not an extension, but I like to give the typical extension answer of it depends.
Yeah.
We can, in general, because this is a statistical evaluation, the more data we have going into these numbers, the better it's going to be, the more accurate it's going to be. Since we were just talking about cost, we do have a way, when you first sign up for NSIP, you can submit historic data, and that historic data all goes in free of charge. So you don't have to pay that $3.50 per animal on that historic data. The only animals that are considered billable animals are your 2 most recent lamb crops. So if you started right now with your 2024 lambs or kids and you submitted 20 years worth of past records, you would only get billed for your 2024 and your 2023 animals that generate breeding values. Everything else goes in free of charge. So yeah, it's I generally advise new flocks and new herds, submit as much data as you have going back as many years, as long as you have pretty good quality data in those historic years. And I realize that there's a time element to submitting that historic data, and time is money. So sometimes it can be a little tricky to go back if you have 20, 30, 40 years worth of records. My general advice there is go back to the oldest ewe in your flock. So if I were starting right now, my oldest ewe right now is 8 years old. I would want to submit 8 years worth of data going back. And that's where we really see the most bang for the buck, because really, yes, those distant past animals do have an impact on our current flock's breeding values, but the further back you go, the less impact they have. So if we can go back to our oldest animal, that's all the better. If you don't have that historic data, don't let that stop you. We can start fresh, start right now. And for your highly heritable traits, you can have good accuracies, usable data in your first generation. If you have good, decent data sets and with one generation worth of data, it might take 2 to 3 generations to get some of those lowly heritable traits into a usable format, like number born, number weaned. So I don't want to make any empty promises that it's making genetic progress. We're in the long game here. It's not like, changing feed rations and you see immediate results. With genetics, it's going to take a couple of generations.
So what would be the basic data set do you think producers should be submitting or collecting just for their own use and then submitting for NSIP?
Yeah, great question. That's going to depend on what breed type and what our management system is. Up on our website, that nsip.org, I've got a collection schedule broken out by kind of breed type. But what most producers are going to do, we have a lot of Midwestern producers here on the call, it still looks like. So what most of us are going to be able to collect would be a few body weights, things like a birth weight, a weaning weight, and a post-weaning weight. And there's some nuances to all of those. We can simplify it a little bit. Is if you can collect a birth weight, a 60-day weight, and a 120-day weight, we can get you the majority of the estimated breeding values if you've also done a birth type and a rearing type. So birth type, rearing type, and 2 or 3 of those body weights, we can get you the majority of the estimated breeding values. And then if you're interested in things like the parasite resistance, you'll want to select or be collecting fecal egg counts. If you're a terminal sire breed, doing some of the ultrasound measurements, those sorts of things. But for the vast majority of us, it's a handful of body weights. Most of us are probably already collecting those weights in our normal practices. So, yeah. Gene, you've had your hand up. I want to make sure I get back to you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So in that slide that had all the EBVs horizontally where I'd ask you to stop, you had percentages across each of the EBVs. That's the first time I had seen that. Is that on all the reports now, or did you just do this for the presentation?
Yeah, so all of the reports, like the percentages, number born and number weaned, should all be in percentages now.
Okay, but you had the explanation that that was the accuracy. Those percentages under each EBV it represented the accuracy.
Yeah,
and kind of going to a couple of the other questions. Yes, that one.
Yes.
This one, okay. Yeah.
So for each of those, is it like 100 animals get you up into pretty high accuracy, or does the number of animals involved in the calculation vary of how high the accuracy gets? And then is there a way to see, instead of a percentage, how many animals were used in calculating each of those individual values?
Yeah, so these values here, they're going to be dependent on several things. One, the first and the one that has the most impact on the accuracy, Gene, is the heritability of the trait. Okay, so that's like in my weaning weight example, if you have just one data point on that animal, the simple calculation for accuracy is the square root of the heritability of that trait. And if you want, I'll even go back Um, let's see, this was not just for demonstration purposes. These are the actual equations for how we calculate the accuracy value of those breeding values. And as you can see, the heritability has the most impact on the accuracy of that trait. Okay. And then it is a function of the quantity and the quality of the data. So if you're interested, we don't publicly list that, but I can get it for you, Gene. If you want to know how many data points went into this 91% accuracy, I can look it up on the back end and tell you, because it's going to be a function of how many records are going into that, but also the structure of the contemporary group. So what's the quality of that data? If you have 100 head, but they're spread across 20, 30, 40 different small contemporary groups, the quality of that data is going to be a little bit lower, and it's going to be explaining less of the variation. Versus if you have two contemporary groups, each with 50 head, that's a higher quality data. It explains more variation for us. So it's not as simple as just saying it's X number of animals going into that particular accuracy value. So, and this is getting into NSIP like 201 level. So don't
and the reason I ask is because when I submitted my request for data a couple of years ago, that got declined, is that was what I was asking for, and then I was kind of told, well, it's not available, and but it's I'm seeing it now, and it's like, okay, why couldn't I get it? So that's why it was new, and it surprised me that it was there. So okay, thanks for answering.
Yeah, and up on our searchable database, Gene, that's something we added a couple of years ago. Is even on our searchable database, I said all of these animals in NSIP are publicly available, and the accuracy values are published for every one of them. So
okay, great, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, I'll pull up the chat box again here and get back to some of those questions. But Carolyn, were there some big hot pressing ones that I needed to hit off the top?
There were just one came to me. Are there courses on feed in NSIP?
Courses on feed in NSIP. So I'm pretty sure Andrew will talk about this next week, correct? And how to feed to maximize genetic potential.
Yep, next month.
Yep. Sorry, next month. That the next one is, and Dr. Weaver is a great presenter. I highly encourage you to tune into that webinar. He's also a great geneticist, so he's on the technical committee of NSIP. So yeah, I can't speak highly enough of Andrew. So tune into that. He'll talk an awful lot about this. A lot of times, though, my general advice for producers is I don't want to see anybody change how they raise their sheep to fit the genetic evaluation. I want to try to fit the genetic evaluation into how you're raising your sheep. Okay. So I don't want you to have to try to, if you haven't been creep feeding, if creep feeding does not fit into your business model, don't start creep feeding because you think it's going to have an impact on your EBVs. Through those genetic linkages, by testing those genetic lines across multiple environments, we've taken that creep feed aspect out of the equation. Okay. So manage your sheep how you want to raise your sheep. We all have different management styles that we like. Some of us graze sheep, some of us don't graze sheep. Some of us feed concentrate, some of us don't. The genetic evaluation should not have any impact on that. We will fine tune the data collection schedules and all that to fit into your management style. Okay. Yeah.
Yes. I'm hunting for the question that okay. So is there an opportunity to compare the genetic selection for crossbreed and crossbred sheep production models?
Yeah, it's a great question there on the crossbreeds. And the short answer is yes and no. The trouble with trying to do genetic evaluations on crossbreds is we need to account for that heterosis effect, because we know that heterosis is going to have an impact on these genetic potentials. Okay. The challenge we have is there are a lot of different crossbreeds that can be developed here in the United States because we have a lot of different breeds. And to have appropriate adjustment factors on crossbreed EBVs, we need to have data sets on structured crosses of all the potential crosses that we could have here in the United States. So as you can imagine, that is a huge data set that we would need. to accurately account for heterosis. Now, short answer is I can teach you there's a way that you can enter in data on crossbred animals, and there's a way that we can enter those animals in utilizing contemporary groups. We can account for those heterosis effects. We would basically treat heterosis like it's an environmental effect and try to put them back onto a purebred level. But that's getting to a higher level than what I planned on talking about here. So if you want to talk about that personally, I'm more than happy to talk to you about it. Composite breeds are a whole nother story. If you have a stabilized composite, we can we can calculate breeding values on those, no problem at all, on a stabilized composite. But if we have multiple percentages of crossbreeds and varying levels of heterosis, it gets a little bit trickier there. Okay. One of the other questions I saw on there is access to certified ultrasound techs is a problem, and yeah, that's definitely a problem. We have a committee within the NSIP board that is trying to train new ultrasound technicians every year. We do have a list of certified sheep ultrasound technicians up on our website. For the most part, there's usually at least one scanner within a 2-3 state radius, and all of the scanners I know are willing to travel and go around and scan sheep. So check out that list. If you need help finding a scanner, let me know, and I'd be glad to hook you up with some. But we also know there are areas where there is no there are no sheep ultrasound scanners, but they might have access to a cattle scanner or a swine scanner. So we do have a way that you can submit that data taken by a non-certified sheep scanner, as long as if we send those images off to a certified scanner to be interpreted, that data can still be accepted. So we do have a few workarounds there, but I'm happy to work with you on an individual basis to get you to get you set up. Okay.
And then I see one, what process has NSIP made in analyzing data from accelerated flocks?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I saw Kathy ask that. Yeah, that's another tricky one where we need the data. We need a big comprehensive data set to do it well. So we've made a little bit of progress in years past. I should mention, so we partner on the actual genetic evaluation, the calculating of estimated breeding values. We actually partner up with our colleagues in Australia at Sheep Genetics in Australia. And when we partnered with them, one of the tricky things was accelerated lambing is not really a thing in Australia. So they weren't really set up to handle multiple lambing events within a calendar year. So in years past, when a ewe had a second lambing event in that year, that second lambing was just ignored. We've gotten to the point now, though, that the second lambing within a calendar year, that data is still being included in the evaluation. Those animals are still generating estimated breeding values. That second lambing is impacting the number born, number weaned, and maternal weaning weights of the dam who was accelerated, but that ewe is not getting any extra credit for doing it on an accelerated system. And that's the tricky part that we need to try to figure out is how much extra credit should that ewe get because she did it on an accelerated system? Because we know not all ewes can do that. That ewe is special to be able to lamb on an 8-month interval or a 9-month interval compared to a yearly cycle. And that's a tricky data set to collect because we need to look at not only we need to look at the lambing interval of those ewes, but we need to look at what was the potential lambing interval of those ewes. Did those ewes lamb on a 9-month interval rather than an 8-month interval because they didn't have the opportunity? They weren't exposed on an 8-month, but they were on a 9. So a lot of little tricky nuances like that. It's going to take a big data set to figure out. And yeah, we need to take a very strategic approach to make that happen.
Awesome.
So, and again, some of these questions, some of these answers are a little bit technical. I don't mean to scare anybody away. It doesn't need to be near that complex. But yeah, we can work with a lot of breeds, a lot of breed types. We've made a lot of progress in the last several years. Not perfect. We have ongoing research all the time, trying to make it better, trying to develop new traits, handle data better. So yeah, always trying to make improvements on it. Yeah. Gene, I saw your hand go back up. Did you have another question, or is that from before?
Well, it was an individual had asked about adding new breeds, and so I don't know if the individual is Julie case, but as long as the breed she's trying to have the analysis on, as long as it falls within one of the major categories, and then is it and then there's a contemporary group. I think that's the answer, isn't it? Do you see that question?
Yes, I didn't see that exact question, but yes, we can add in new breeds. Like the last time I checked, we had 40 some odd breeds currently participating in NSIP. And just like you said, Gene, as long as we would just need to kind of figure out which category those animals should go into. Are they a terminal sire breed? Are they a maternal breed? Are they a hair breed? Because we need to figure out what are the appropriate input parameters. So we need to calculate things like heritability estimates, those genetic correlations, do all that sort of background work. But yeah, all that can be done, and we add new breeds in all the time. So the more the merrier.
Awesome, thank you. I think that we've been through all of the questions, and if we did miss somebody's question, feel free to reach out to myself and I can get the question to Rusty, or if Rusty, you have his information somewhere, and you can go to NSIP, I'm sure, and contact him through that way. But I'd like to say thank you, Rusty, for joining us, and for everyone else who listened and learned. And I know I sure did learn some more about NSIP. And oh, Julie says Copworth, Southdown, Shropshire, and Tunis are
Yes.
the breeds she's interested in.
So we currently have Southdowns and Shrops. In the past, we have had Coopworths and Tunis. So those input parameters are already in place. So yeah, I'm putting my contact information in the chat box. So if anybody has any questions afterwards or want to have a conversation, feel free to get a hold of me, and I'm more than happy to talk with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and everyone have a great evening, a safe spring, and happy lambing if you're still lambing. So goodbye.